It's a mad, 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 mad world in which the recession may begin to look like a depression. We're going to find out. Coming up next, Gerald Celente here with us, sitting in the Economist chair this week.
Well, we're seeing things in this country we haven't seen probably going all the way back to the 70s. People are beginning to protest, whether it's about taxes, government spending, or government programs. Joining us is Gerald Celente from Trends Research. And Gerald, let's begin with taxes. We saw it on April 15th, over 700 tea parties across the country. In May of this year, there were 4 referendums on the California ballot, 3 to raise taxes, 1 to control legislators' salary. They defeated resoundingly all the tax increases, and they froze legislators' salaries. And then recently, we had a budget impasse between the governor and the politicians, and he said no taxes, and we put together a budget deal that had no taxes. We now have what is called a Tea Party Express. It's a bus tour for additional tea parties all across the country. This is really turning into a trend. Any comments?
Well, it's a trend that we saw coming, and it has nothing to do with right-wing or Fox News. We wrote about this in 2007 when President Bush was in office. As a Bronx boy, my saying is when people lose everything and they have nothing left to lose, they lose it. And they're losing everything now. They're losing their homes, they're losing their jobs, and they're finally protesting. And this is historical and cannot be played down. And anyone that does play it down is doing it out of ignorance or fear. This is new in America that we've had these kind of tax protests. It's just the beginning, because they're not going to be able to solve the problems. The next shoe to drop after the foreclosure issue and commercial real estate, of course, is going to be the tax issue. People are going to start losing their homes because they're not going to be able to pay the property taxes. So this is just the beginning. And as we're seeing, the people are being squeezed at every level, whether it's raising fees on parking meters to the so-called sin taxes. It was the spark that started the first American Revolution, and taxation without representation is going to be the spark that starts the second one.
You're bringing up something here that doesn't get measured in the economic statistics, and I'm speaking here of the Consumer Price Index. California, the beginning of this year, doubled the motor vehicle tax from 0.65 to like almost 1.2. Now, if you're an average family where a husband and wife work, let's just assume you have 2 cars. They just doubled your motor vehicle tax. If you're a smoker here in California, they just increased the cost of a pack of cigarettes by $1. If you smoke cigars, they're up almost nearly $1. Gerald, that doesn't get measured in the CPI. If they're giving more traffic tickets, if they're raising little fees on your homeowner's insurance or your cable bills or your phone bills, that doesn't get measured in CPI. And I think that's what people are really, as you're talking about, you wrote about in your Trends Research at the beginning of the year, they're nickel and diming people, but you know those nickels and dimes really add up if you either lost a job or your wages are so low.
Exactly, and it's adding up to anger and protest, and we're going to see it, because there are other things going on as well. When you see, for example, that the banks and finance companies that we, the people, in 2008 have given over $150 billion to are cutting up that money and distributing $32.6 billion in executive bonuses. You know, people see these things and they're very angry, but you're not hearing it on the mainstream media or from the mainstream economists. As we say in the trends business, there are 3 worlds out there, Jim. There's the media world, there's the political world, and there's the real world. And the media world and the political world are totally out of touch with what's going on in the real world. This is just the beginning. It's going to be off with their heads. Current events form future trends. We're hearing all this talk about how China is going to be the engine of growth and prosperity throughout the world. No such thing is happening. Their economy is being kept afloat by stimulus packages as well. The difference, of course, is they're not in debt. They could afford to do it. Nonetheless, just this past week, over 30,000 people in Eastern Province took to the streets in protest of a plant closing, a steel plant. And you know what they did? They took the guy that was running the steel plant into the ground and was going to fire everybody, and they killed him. And you're going to start seeing just, from the people that brought us off with their heads, the French, now they have boss snappings, and they threaten to blow up all the properties of one of the companies that try to do them out of their severance pay. And, the Americans can make fun of the French all they want, but the French workers stand up and the French people stand up. There's going to become a time in this country where the people that aren't weighed down with junk food and aren't, Walmarted to death are going to stand up and fight. We are on the cusp of the second American Revolution.
You know what surprises me, though? We had two major bills proposed by this administration. Cap and tax, which would impose, close to $2 trillion of taxes on the economy. When they interviewed Warren Buffett, he owns a utility company. He was straightforward. He said, look, we're going to have to buy these carbon credits, and we're just going to turn around and pass it on to you, our consumer, and you're not going to be too happy about that, but that's what we're going to do. We have Obamacare. We're seeing in the polls, as more people find out about this, there is falling support all around the country. Both parties, doesn't matter what political persuasion, yet they're persisting on following through with this. Are they so out of touch, Gerald, that they're basically saying, we don't care what they say, we're immune from that, we're going to go ahead anyway?
Yes, because Wall Street has hijacked Washington. It could not be clearer. As I mentioned, we're seeing these executive payouts going. What does $32.3 billion? How could they justify this when they lost an estimated $50 billion? They're distributing over $32 billion of our dollars to their friends. They don't care. And when you talk about cap and tax, as you call it, who is the big player in that? One that owns 10% of the trading firm in that. Could it happen to be
Goldman's?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Goldman Sachs. As I've mentioned before, Jim, this is criminal activity. It's clear and simple. If the names on Wall Street were called Celente, Caruso, Mondavi, Puccini, Rossini, they'd call it the mafia, and it would even be bigger news than the death of Michael Jackson. Every day it would be front page news. But because the white shoe boys are the criminals, and they've come up with this scheme about them being too big to fail and deserving these executive compensation, they couch it in white shoe boy language, like credit default swaps, special investment vehicles. I mean, you know the language. How about calling them cons and scams and schemes and ripoffs? That's what's going on. We're going to see a revolution in this country, no matter how much the media plays down these tax revolts. The people, a lot of the people, a good third, we estimate, have had it, and they're not going to take it anymore.
I want to go to another topic, too. I just saw they extended the cash for clunker trade on Friday, because apparently the first $1 billion was used up in nearly a week. It would seem to me, Gerald, if you had an $800 billion stimulus bill that didn't work, and you have a $1 billion program that's working, the guys that run the country would want to focus more on what is working. Instead, they're going off the wall with cap and tax, which would reward government with taxes and Goldman Sachs with trading revenues, including Al Gore's trading company. People don't realize the vested interest of Wall Street in this whole thing and how much they're planning on making in this carbon trading, but more importantly for you and I as consumers, what this is going to do for gas at the pump, our utility bills, you turn on the oven at night or turn on a light switch, we're going to be paying higher prices.
This is the greatest crime wave ever to hit this country. It's bigger than the Wild West and greater than the Chicagoland gang style of the 1930s. It's in broad daylight and people don't see it or don't want to see it. Again, Wall Street has hijacked Washington. The Goldman gang is in control. When you're talking about, carbon tax, who's the head of the Commodities Future Exchange Commission? Gary Gensler? Where's he from? Goldman Sachs. Remember when they're going to take that TARP money so that people that were having foreclosure problems were going to be freed up of them? And as you mentioned, the little people having a break on their cash for clunkers routine, who did they take that away from them? Where did the money go to? It went to the big banks so they could have their bailouts and stimulus money turned over as executive compensation. It's a ripoff from top to bottom. This is not socialism. The merger of state and corporate powers, as we're seeing before our eyes, as you mentioned with Obamacare